It's a real conundrum as you become successful, because you're in a situation where if your children ask you for something, there's no formal reason for you to say no, because you can provide whatever is being requested. But by doing that, you steal from them the opportunity to generate that for themselves. And that's, I suppose, one of the dangers of one of the dangers of prosperity. What that does to people over the long run, I don't think we understand well yet, because most people haven't been prosperous for very long, right? There's been plenty of privation to go around, and of course there still is in many, many parts of the world, including in the United States and in the West. There's a rule if you're a social scientist, and the first rule is, in some sense, to look at context before you look at personality. And I think there's been a lot of really radical changes in our society in the last 50 years, and we don't understand their consequences. The most radical change is probably the birth control pill, because it's provided women with voluntary control over the reproductive function. And that's equivalent to a major biological mutation, right? Its consequence is virtually incomprehensible. I mean, partly one of the consequences is where reliable birth control is provided to women, first of all, they immediately become educated. Second, their economies tend to grow. And third, the birth rate falls below replacement. And then all three of those factors are monumental, so perhaps especially the third, the falling of the birth rate below replacement, which is the case in virtually every country in the Western world except the United States. We don't know exactly what the optimal conditions are under which you toughen up, let's say. Most children now have older parents, right? Because people aren't having children until they're in their 30s. And there's a big difference between having a parent who's in his or her 30s and having a parent who's in his or her 20s.
Yep.
The 20-year-olds are still kind of like kids, and they're going to be more usefully neglectful, I would say. Well, look, one of the things we used to do with my daughter when she was very little was, she was about a year and a half, is we'd have her in a room alone, and she would usually complain about that for a few minutes, and then she'd find a way to amuse herself. She liked to take books out of shelves and put them back in, and like if you let her get through that initial bit of misery, then she would learn how to regulate herself, and she got very good at that. So that's a good example of minor privation having a positive influence. But children used to have multiple siblings, and siblings toughen you up because there's tremendous competition in families among siblings, and they had younger parents who had fewer resources. And now parents are older, first of all, and second, they're more resource rich, and so they're more likely to schedule their children to death in some sense to provide them with all the opportunities that they feel would be useful. And that's understandable. And plus, because they have fewer children, each child is in some sense more precious. Not like if you have 10 children, you don't love all of them, but there's 10 of them. There's only so much excess attention that can go around, and they do a lot of socializing each other rather than being socialized by parents. But if you only have one child, you're going to devote all your resources to providing them with absolutely everything you can provide them with. And one of the dangers of that is that you'll overprotect them and you'll provide them with too much. And we don't understand those dynamics, right? We don't understand how much you should stay hands off your kids and let them go out there and make their own mistakes and find their own way. And that's tricky, and we're ignorant about it. And so I think one of the consequences of that is that we do have a reasonable percentage of young people, maybe young adolescents, the kind that you hear about at university, who have been overprotected and overscheduled and under-challenged in some sense. We extend that overprotection far longer than is helpful. It's hard though, because as I said, when you have resources, you can use them to make your children's lives, let's say, easier. But the question is, do you really want to make the life of someone you love easier? My wife and I had 2 kids, and we didn't start late compared to most of the people we knew. I think our first child was born when my wife was 29. We certainly felt that we would have had more children if we would have started earlier. There's no doubt that, and this is a very important thing to know, there's not that many things in your life that are of central importance. There's half a dozen, I would say. There's your friends, there's your family, your intimate partner. By family, I mean your siblings and your parents, but then there's your children, there's your career, there's your educational trajectory, there's how you take care of yourself and protect yourself from temptation, and what sort of useful things you do in the time that you're not working. But children are a third of life, something like that, maybe more. And so I would certainly recommend that you don't miss it. It's complicated because, of course, now in most situations both parents have to work, and but it's always been complicated to raise children. They're a long-term investment, but yeah, right, which is hard. That's why it's hard to even pay childcare workers, right? Because the payoff for having a child doesn't occur until 2 decades later, or sometimes 4 decades later. But it's not something you want to miss, that's for sure, because it's that's life, It's part of the human condition, and little children pay you back immensely if you have a good relationship with them, if you're on their side and encourage them, because they're an unconditional source of joy and love. The other thing I noticed that you should all know is that as you get older, your family, the family you've produced, becomes more and more important. So we teach young women in particular that the fundamental goal of their life is going to be their career. And, first of all, most people don't have careers, they have jobs. And those are very different things. But you're not a very happy camper, so to speak, if you're 45 and you have no one, and it doesn't go upwards after that. So don't miss it.